right? So in the last video, we showed how the banks are involved in this process of keeping part of the reserves and loaning the rest, and then goes back into a bank, and then they keep part of the reserves and loan the rest, and this process repeats itself. And so the total amount of deposits ends up growing on this monetary base of reserves. So this is because we have a fractional reserve system. So fractional reserve system just means that we only have to keep part of the deposits in reserves, and the rest we could loan out, right? The alternative would be a 100% reserve system. In that case, you must keep it all. Probably in that case, you would have to pay the bank to keep your money rather than the bank paying you to keep your money. So anyways, in this fractional reserve system, our deposits are multiplied. Well, we can say our reserves are multiplied because we don't need as many reserves, but we don't need to have 100% reserves behind each deposit. So let's go back to our example and see, do a comparison. So we're going to look at if it's out of the banking system, if the original money is out of the banking system, or if it's in the banking system. And we're going to see how it gets multiplied by being in the, okay, so let's kind of summarize what we were looking at before. Okay, so out of the banking system, you had $1,000 cash, okay? So if you're out of the banking system and you had $1,000 cash and that's it. We put it into the banking system, right? So when you go into the banking system, initially you have $1,000 of a deposit, okay? And then there was a loan made, and we assume they put it all back in. So we make a loan, we loan it, and so we end up with another 900 deposit. And there's another loan, right? They loan the maximum they can. So we got another 810 deposit. And then they keep 10% of that and loan 90%. And we would then end up with 729 deposit, and so on. If we add these all up and they keep doing this, if we assume they keep doing this and no one keeps extra reserves and it's all lent out and it all goes back in the banking system, no one keeps cash at home from this, then we're going to end up with a total of 10,000. So our little $1,000 in cash that we had before, when it goes in the banking system, it becomes very powerful and it gets multiplied. So it got multiplied into this big amount. So we went from having $1,000 in cash, no deposits, to having a total of $10,000 in deposits, right? So it's 10 times more, right? There's actually something called the deposit multiplier, and this one is equal to 1 over our required reserve ratio. Okay, so that's required reserve ratio. And in our case, this was 10% because we're required to keep 10% of our reserves, of our deposits in reserve. So this is going to be 10. So what that tells us, if we know how much new reserves we have, we get new reserves times this multiplier, okay, times the multiplier, it's going to tell us how much. This is the change in deposits, in total deposits. So for example, in this particular problem, we had $1,000 was put into the system, and our multiplier is 10, right? Because they only have to keep 10%. So 10% can make, it can be multiplied 10 times. So this is 10. So that would predict that at the most we could create $10,000 in deposits, right? If we put $1,000 into the banking system, it creates $10,000 deposits. The last thing, so that's our basic idea. So by doing this process of loaning, our monetary base gets multiplied. Okay, and so the last thing we're going to mention right now is, well, what happened to our money supply? Well, remember, cash is in the money supply. And deposits are also in the money supply. So now our change in our money supply, what was our change in our money supply? So in this case, well, our deposits went up by 10,000, and this is the increase in deposits. And our cash went down by 1,000, right? This is the decrease in cash, because it's no longer cash on hand once it's in the banking system. In the banking system, it's sitting in the bank reserves. It's no longer cash on hand. So our money supply increased by 9,000. Okay, so as a summary of this problem, our deposits increased by 10, but to find out the change in the money supply, we have to take away this original cash. So our money supply only increased by 9,000. So in the future videos, we'll come back to this idea a little bit. We'll talk about, well, what happens in the real world? How might the real world be a little different than this? Before we do that, though, I just want to mention one last thing. You can also imagine this thing working in reverse. So if people take their money out of the banking system, so you go and take a bunch of money out of the banking system, then the bank is going to have to make less loans, right? And so the deposit multiplier will work backwards. So if you take, in this case, if you took, if you went and took $1,000 out, then the total deposits in the system will have to decrease by 10,000. So it works in both directions, both as a plus or a minus.